as an Australian, that's easy for me. But what's about Vietnamese? You know, what is there to be proud of about Vietnamese, about being Vietnamese? So the key thing is to help them understand what is it, what is so unique about Vietnamese culture? What is it that you should be proud about? And that's when I talked about the key thing is to learn about Vietnamese history, about Vietnamese culture. For example, I'm sure a lot of you might have this question in your mind, but you didn't want to say it because you don't want to hurt your parents' feelings, maybe. Some of you might think, what is so unique about Vietnamese culture? It looks like Chinese to me, right? Well, let me answer it this way. Because Vietnam was indeed dominated by the Chinese over 1,000 years, it's inevitable that a lot of stuff we have are borrowed from the Chinese or vice versa, okay? Because when you live together for 1,000 years, you know, there will be a lot of culture that has become fused, okay? But just don't assume that it's one way. Who says that it's the Vietnamese who borrow it from the Chinese and not vice versa? But aside from that, there are many things that are unique about the Vietnamese culture that you ought to be proud of. Let me give you a few examples, and it's both culture as well as history. Vietnam, if you look at the old Vietnamese society, we already exercised democracy even thousands and thousands of years ago when the rest of the world didn't even have the faintest notion about democracy. Here's an example. Back in, I forgot when, I don't remember the exact year, but this was when we were facing invasion by the Mongolians, okay? We know that the Mongolians were coming. The king decided that it is such a crucial matter that he didn't want to make the decision himself. He gathered all the gray beard, as we call them, you know, all the senior leaders in the country into a convention that in Vietnamese we call it Hội nghị Diễn Hồng, okay? And the king asked these Vietnamese leaders, these elders, should we fight or should we give up? Knowing that they are going to outnumber us 10 to 1. Maybe we should just, you know, give in, right? So that way we could save a lot of lives. That's, you know, you could think that it could be a sensible decision as a leader. Or do we want to fight, knowing that we all might die and our race, our Vietnamese race, may get extinct, okay? The decision was, let's fight. We did. We fought and we won, although we were outnumbered 10 to 1. Aside from the fact that we should be proud that we were able to accomplish such an impossible task, but the point here is that was the earliest form of democracy. You know, the king didn't think of Vietnam as his own possession, and therefore, you know, it's up to him to make the decision. When the decision is so crucial that it impacts so many lives and the entire race of the Vietnamese, he had the wisdom to gather the people and ask the people and follow the people's will. That's democracy, okay? So, little detail, and of course because of that, the people were more than willing to fight because they're now fighting for their homeland, for themselves, for the Vietnamese people, rather than just trying to defend the land for the king. It's not just the king's land anymore, it's our homeland that we're protecting. So that's, things like that makes you proud of being a Vietnamese. Another example about the difference between Vietnamese and Chinese culture, I think it's a key difference. As you know, in Chinese culture, the women are not valued. And they have this saying from Confucius that when the women are in family, they're supposed to follow the leadership of their fathers, right? When they get married, they have to comply to their husband's wish. And when the husband dies, guess what? They have to comply to the eldest son's leadership. That's what Chinese women were taught. In Vietnamese, there's this saying, đang ruộng sâu trông nái không bằng con gái đầu lòng. Meaning that the eldest daughter is the most valuable thing that you could have compared to land or buffaloes. It tells you, obviously, that we value women, that in Vietnamese society, in Vietnamese culture, there's no such thing as the fact that men are not valued more than women. Okay? That's the very distinct difference between Vietnamese and Chinese culture. And because of that culture that we had Hai Bà Trưng, the Trưng sisters were the only two women in the entire world history who managed to conquer, who managed to fight against foreign dominance, establish themselves as the emperors, in this case, king of Vietnam. And they got to that position because they were leaders. Had it been the case where the women's role was suppressed, they always had to follow the men's lead, then there wouldn't be any Trưng sisters. And they're unique in world history because if you look at the history of the entire world, of course there are many women queens, many women empresses, right? But all of them got to the throne either because they inherited from their father, because the father didn't have a son, the previous king didn't have a son, so he gave the throne to his daughter, right? So that's how they got to the throne. Or by killing somebody to get to the throne by the bloody way. Nobody but the Trưng sisters are the two only women in world history who got to the throne by fighting. And in this case, fighting foreign dominance and established a new kingdom for Vietnam. That is the fact that all Vietnamese women are very proud of. And again, it illustrates the difference between our culture and Chinese culture. Why am I saying all of this? That's why it's important to tell young people about these facts, about Vietnamese culture, about Vietnamese history. Because if they find out about these things, about the fact that, guess what? The Vietnamese is the only people who managed to defeat the Mongolians 3 times. All the 3 times that the Mongolians came to Vietnam. No other country managed to do that. And especially when we were outnumbered 10-1. If you tell these stories, then our young people would see that there is something to be proud about being Vietnamese. Okay, maybe it's really cool to be Vietnamese. So the first step is to talk about culture, about history. Once you have that pride, then you'll be more interested. Then you would want to find out more about your root. And then you will start joining the Vietnamese community, start coming to places like this. So that would be my answer.